Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to a new episode of our podcast, Hkayti Hkaya. I'm your host, Jalul Bourahla, and today we have a remarkable guest joining us, Dr. Amina Douidi. She is an Algerian scholar currently living in the UK, in the United Kingdom. So Dr. Amina Douidi is an ELT materials consultant with a strong focus on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Amina, you are going to explain to us what DEI is. So she is a consultant in that and in intercultural communication in ELT. So she's been actively involved in working with publishers, material writers, and curriculum designers, ensuring, of course, that educational materials are inclusive, diverse, and equitable. Amina, how are you?
Assalamu alaikum. Hello to your guests. I'm okay, alhamdulillah. I'm very good, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing great, and thank you very much for accepting my invitation to talk on the podcast.
Thank you for
And
having me.
thank you so much. And of course, Amina would start with that, with DEI. I'm very curious about this. So, what is this diversity, equity, and inclusion in ELT? Is it a new field? Is it something now that is new and evolving?
It has always been a topic of interest for researchers, for teachers as well, to make sure that your students are included in the classroom and make sure that to make sure the materials are representative of the society that the students evolve in. However, there were and there still are a lot of issues with representing and including historically marginalized groups. And whatever the context you in whichever context you are, the historically marginalized group may change.
Hmm.
With the murder of George Floyd, there was a rise of anti-racist rhetoric and activism that reached corporations and companies around the world, and the publishing industry is one of them. A lot of publishers have pledged to be more considerate of historically marginalized groups, including the Black community around the world, especially in the global north. And it started with trying to be more equitable and inclusive to the Black members of the society, and it evolved into including all historically marginalized groups, whether who people who are within the spectrum of neurodiversity, disability, genders, and also religions, cultures, and race and ethnicity is one dimension that I focus on. So, with publishers, what I do is as an external reviewer consultant. I look at the materials they provide me and advise on a better way of representing historically marginalized groups. I can give you examples in the field of English
Sure.
language teaching. We have units like talk about jobs.
Hmm.
So, and you would have pictures of different roles, and then you would have text about different roles, and you would have a scientist and a researcher, you would
Hmm.
have a sports person, you'd have a lawyer, etc. So, what has happened in ELT is that we reproduced the stereotypes of the society within the textbooks, and then
Hmm.
there you will find a lawyer who is a
Hmm.
middle-aged white man, uh, mostly maybe middle class, that would be systematically represented or representing how a lawyer looks like. So, as
Hmm.
an ELT DEI consultant, and I come across jobs and roles that are not as inclusive as they should be, I highlight that to the publisher and I make recommendations. I try to rely on scholarly work and research to justify my recommendation, basically, and
And
especially.
how receptive do you think are the publishers in recent years of whatever remarks you give them about the necessity to include other races or in terms of gender? What have you noticed in terms of a reception of your remarks?
So when they call someone like me into the project, whether in the middle or not necessarily at the beginning, they haven't. They are still calling DEI consultant at the middle or the end of the project when it's basically all wrapped up and they want to make sure everything is equitable and in good quality, basically, to be published. So when they call someone in like me, they already have established a budget, and the fact that they are creating budgets within the pipeline of the project, it shows commitment to DEI. There is more work to be done, of course. However, at the state where it is now, I think it's going in the right direction.
All right. And I'm curious to know what has inspired you to focus on diversity and equality or equity and inclusion. What has been can you share a little bit your journey to that?
Sure. I did my research, my PhD research in the field of intercultural communication as a field of inquiry, and I focused on the analysis of textbooks. I have a huge passion for textbooks
Mm,
since I started teaching and studying English. I have a real passion for the materials themselves, for the books. I love looking through the pages and trying to see who's there and who's not there. So it has always been something that was with me when I was doing my licence and then later on when I did my master's. And then when I wanted to do my PhD, I thought I want to look at interculturality
mm.
in and how it is articulated in textbooks and therefore in the classroom. And that's how I ended up working in this line of work. Yeah.
Wonderful. And you said since you were studying in the licence and the masters, so that goes back to the time when you were here in Algeria. And so I guess my question here is, what were your remarks or what have you noticed in general about Algerian textbooks in public schools, especially concerning English? um, then and now. I'm not sure, are you a bit familiar with the new curriculum and textbooks in the public schools in Algeria? So, what have been your remarks again about that?
I have done my PhD around in 2000, between 2016 to when the new books were published. It was around
Mm,
2000. They started working on them around 2018, and then they got published recently, and they are used at the moment. So my PhD research was focused on the previous curriculum
mhm,
and the previous textbooks, but the essence of it, the theories that I discussed, the concepts that I deconstructed, basically are the same concept that I am using now in my line of work as a DI consultant for publishers, and these are the same concept that I would look into if I were to analyze the current um, English textbooks used in the public schools. So few of the concepts that came up in my research, there was the theme of banal nationalism and
mm,
nationalism in general. This was mainly highlighted with the need to use Algerian flags in
mm,
whenever opportunity we would have. So the
mhm,
discourse of patriotism, the
mhm,
discourse of attachment to the nation was very prominent in the first in the earlier versions of ELT textbooks that we used in Algeria. I will need to look more deeply into the new series, but I cannot make a comment on them because I haven't examined them with the same thoroughness that I did with the previous series. So the theme of banana nationalism was something that came up. The absence of um, Black Algerians in the
Mm,
previous series was something
sure.
that struck me as well. So basically, Algeria is light skin, Algeria is middle class as well. All Algerians have access to the same thing. So the myth of equality was something represented through, free school and access to hospitals. And however, the values of what Algeria wants to promote among its younger generation, such as generosity, solidarity, um, and hospitality, were prominent in the previous series. So there were a lot of beautiful things as well in the previous series.
How do you think curriculum designer fall into this trap of uh, banal nationalism, of stereotypes? Do you think that this is something um, top down, or do you think that this is something that um, is due to the fact that these curriculum designers are not well versed into ways in which to integrate intercultural elements in the curricula or in the textbook? Or do you think that this is due to ideology in general in any given country? Or do you think that this is something cultural? So, or is it a combination of all of these different things?
I think you answered your question by your last using your last phrase as a combination of plenty of different things. So textbooks are known to be ideological products. They are the result of a combination of factors, and there are many elements that need to be considered when we are designing a whole textbook at the unit level, and then at the activity level, and then the skills you want to promote, the grammar rules you want to put forward. And there are a lot of parameters that go into creating a textbook, and the technicality and the technicity of it is something that we are not trained to. It's something like it's that treasure that publishers for years haven't communicated to the masses. So if somebody like yourself want to go into ELT publishing, where do they start? If you want to
Mm,
write a textbook with the
mm,
the whole logical sequencing and processes that a textbook has, where do you get trained to do that? Who can teach you to do that? So only a select number of people were writing materials, based usually in Oxford, or people based. I would stick to the example of Oxford. So you will
mm,
find that most of the big publishers are based in Oxford, and the materials writers, you'll see the geography of it. You can ask people around, and you can
mm,
look at the locality, and you see that they have access to the privilege of writing textbooks because of proximity to the publishers, right? So initially, the industry hasn't started with a framework. Like, we used to write textbooks according to the needs. So if and then we created the science of writing a textbook. There are sequences, and then we rely on social theories such as social theories such as scaffolding, for example, with Vygotsky, and then you would find you will learn new five vocabulary elements, and then recycle them by the end of the unit, and move to the next session, and then recycle them back into the next unit, etc. So we started relying on theory when we're teaching phonetics, or when we are providing input or instruction about grammar, and we rely on, for example, lexicography, or the dogma theory, and then we rely on these theories to create the materials. And the materials will, if you analyze them, you will see, oh, these authors come from this school, or these authors follow this paradigm, right? So there is this methodological ideology, but there is also the personal ideology that comes in. You usually write about what you know. And if what you know is only your circle, then you end up representing your circle.
Sure.
And that's how it basically goes. Then you have the top down instructions that come um, based on the language policy or based on the education policy. And then you will have set of values that you are required to promote in the textbook. So if the education ministry of education says that we want our children to be proud of being Algerian, to uphold certain values of generosity. I was speaking about hospitality earlier. Then you will find these themes in the textbook because they are part of a vision, and that's this vision is a top-down vision. So I don't think there is anything malicious about the way these materials writers design their materials and write their materials. Again, maybe it's naive from me, but I don't think a material writer goes like, "Oh, I'm gonna promote this ideology through this activity about."
Yeah, and this is perhaps the, in a way, the essence earlier of my question. That is, are we consciously or unconsciously, for the curriculum designer, is he or she consciously or unconsciously writing or designing the curriculum and the textbook? There is, we all know that there is a phenomena of like self censorship, that there are certain topics, there are certain things that you don't go into, even if you don't have any kind of instruction that you shouldn't, but you just do it consciously or unconsciously. So perhaps it's not like, as you said, it's paved with the best intentions, but that's usually how it ends up. That is, we are interested, of course, in the final product, where we see where we see the level of representation of certain groups, where we see, is there mentioning of certain topics or not, of certain perhaps social issues. We are interested in that, and that is going to reveal for us the social milieu, or the ideological, of course, side at play in the curriculum design or in the textbook design. And so my next question would be then, on the other side, if we have the other side, which is, of course, a diverse, inclusive curriculum or textbook. If we take the other side and we listen to the critics of those who are against diversity and inclusion, they would say, well, if you have too much diversity, you would end up with a national identity which is not very clear, which is perhaps confusing, which can create, and this is the argument of those who are against, the critics, create confusion, especially for the kids, for the children. And their argument against would be, to what extent should you be diverse? And so what we see now, of course, you are well aware of this in the United States, for example. I'm not sure about Britain. I'm not really sure Britain, but in the United States, we know that there is the question of for example, gay rights, or the question of binary identity, or all of these different identities. So to what extent should we be diverse in your mind?
I'm not sure who said that, but at some point, I would. I'm not sure who said that expression. I will need to look. At some point, I will need to look into it. But it says we are not free until we are all free.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to dignity and when it comes to respecting each other within the public space, within the society, within the educational sphere at school, I think what education should do is promotes values such as respect and understanding, and not harming each other. So whichever discourse is promoted on these course books, I think I sit with the position of kindness,
Mm.
and that position is very very hard to achieve when you have a lot of people not understanding what is the purpose of including historically marginalized groups. So if
Sure.
we are talking about the context of Europe or the context of the US, um, populations that identify as part of the LGBT plus community have been traumatized, killed, harassed, and in many places in the US and in Europe. And it's even worse in countries like ours, where it becomes a danger to an individual who identifies as a member of the LGBT plus community to openly I speak out about their identity. So um, when the life of human beings is at risk, I always sit with the position of caution. And however, if there is a will to be respectful of humans and human beings
Mhm.
within the educational sphere, I think it is the responsibility of school directors, of materials writers, to make sure that every child and every teacher is protected, respected, and studies and works in dignity. No,
And
it,
and
it
and
doesn't
and
matter
he,
how we can achieve that, as long as
Mhm.
everyone is safe and can exist in dignity.
And my question here, perhaps, especially for a curriculum designer and consultant, for you, how do you like keep certain distance from all the ideological cultural wars that are at play at school? We can see, I think this last month, there was a huge debate, for example, in France about abaya. And so the school, it seems to me, and I follow a lot of this in the United States. I'm not really familiar with what's going on in Europe, but in the United States, the school has become really a battleground for the culture wars. And so, how do you, as a consultant, try, especially in the intercultural sphere, try to keep a distance from all of these different competing ideologies and make sure that they are not there in the textbook, and that what you are achieving rather is equality, is inclusion of historically marginalized groups, and of course of diversity, which are all very noble and essential, I think, elements that should be in any textbook, not only in the ELT textbook.
DEI has been weaponized as a field of
Mm,
as a profession, and DEI experts have been instrumentalized, used to check the diversity box, for
Yes.
example.
So how do you avoid that, Amina?
So I
That's tricky.
I I as a person who is considered a minority here in Europe, and my identity sits at the intersection of my scholarship,
Mm,
being a Muslim, person of color, woman, mother, and all these identities that
mm,
play a role in how I consult as well, but also at the intersection of what the world needs is an informed input. So, and that's what I try to give.
mm,
So I rely on my background as a researcher. I rely on my background as a teacher, but I rely also as my on my experience and lived experiences as a minoritized person in Europe, for instance, and how those experiences. So if I am and my identity is put into tests. So my identity as a Muslim is put into test, and and my fellow Muslims would experience marginalization, discrimination, etc. So, as one of my identities is a threat uh, to some people, then my role is to bring more understanding, explain more, teach more, show more of myself and my family and my lifestyle, and I talk openly about my life and my professional life, a little bit of my personal life on LinkedIn, for example, which gives an insight into how one Muslim woman lives, or works, or does business, basically. So that's my approach to it, making it human, making it personal. And when I am talking about the inclusion, for example, of different religious groups,
mm.
regardless of which religion you have, because I can't be the one who picks and chooses which religion to include and which religion not to include, or whether to include people who have religions and people who don't have religions. So that's not my place. My place is to ensure that there is space for everybody within a reasonable environment, which would be, school education. And then when it comes to the book, then there is a reasonable representation of everybody. And then when you are teaching, taking an intercultural approach, you are also teaching critical skills.
Mm,
And with these critical skills and training teachers as well to be inclusive in a critical manner, with these critical skills, you create the space in the classroom to discuss whatever representation is in the book. At the end of the day, the book is just a number of pages that you can discuss, you can
exactly.
ignore, and
Yeah,
you can also develop.
exactly. And so I guess um, that is my next question there. That is for us here in Algeria, for example, our textbooks, as you have noted before, are more or less uniform, especially in terms of culture and in terms of representation. So, how can a teacher, uh, being well aware now of the diversity of the classroom first, because we have very diverse classrooms, how can a teacher in primary school, now that we have English in primary school, in middle school and in high school, how can she go beyond the textbook? That is, even if the textbook is not diverse or inclusive, and that seems to be like quite a long shot for that to happen for
Yeah.
now. How can she go beyond the textbook and implement certain strategies to uh, have DEI?
I like that in your imagination, a teacher is a woman. So
Mhm,
I really like that. So a teacher can, for example, work on the unit of family. If we take the unit of family, so family is not just a mother, a father, a daughter, a son, grandmother and grandfather. A family could be an orphan who is in your classroom and who will be triggered with the unit of about
Sure.
family. So before you go into the classroom, you have access to the book and you know your student, you know the family situation of your students. You have consulted and you know the Algerian society, you know that some children grow up with the aunties, other children grow up with the grandparents, some children don't have their fathers, some children have many mothers, which
Yeah.
would be, you know, the auntie, the sister, the cousin, the
Yeah.
neighbor, and
The
everyone get
grandmother.
involved, to the grandmother as well.
Mm.
Everyone is involved. So the family unit or the family structure, culturally speaking, in the local setting, is so diverse and complex. And
Sure.
then your job is to teach the language so that the students speak about their own reality. So
Mm.
that student who is an orphan, they should be empowered to write a paragraph about their family without
Mm.
feeling that they have to lie and imagine a mother and a father or imagine a life that is not
Sure.
theirs, right?
Sure.
Again, we sit on the side of kindness,
Mm.
and that's the philosophy behind it. So
Yeah.
you can create an open-ended tree, a family tree that they can draw from. And then you
Mm.
can give the example of my best friend is my family, my neighbor is part of my family, or my I grew up as a teacher. You can say I grew up with my grandmother and I consider my grandmother being my mother. Or you can create a fake character or imagine a character that tells their story, and you can just draw a family tree where this character has doesn't have a mother but has so many aunties that care
Mm.
about them, or is so close to the teacher, you know, perpetuate that idea of trust. So that's how you could be inclusive in primary school.
So, as much then as you are trying to develop critical thinking in your students and learners and pupils, I guess that we have first to develop critical thinking in the teacher in the first place, because what I've noticed as a teacher is that when a new teacher, and that was my case too when I started teaching, when you are handed a textbook, you follow it to the letter. That is, you just keep the textbook in front of you and do what the textbook is saying. And it's only later on when you start to notice that there are certain inconsistencies or there are certain problems there in culturally, and you start to see clearly that this is not working in the way it is supposed to be working according to the curriculum designers or to the ministry, for example. But the problem is that that comes a bit too late. So what is your advice as a consultant, of course, to teachers to develop critical thinking based on the example that you have given of how to look at the family? But there are, of course, uh, dozens of other topics that they can look at, and they are going to have all the time new textbooks that we are not asking them to analyze them as if they are consultants
Yeah.
or as if they are experts, but at least to notice what is on the surface and to, as we said, go beyond the textbook. So what are some skills or techniques that would help the teacher um, self-evaluate the textbook?
Um, First, understand the الهيكل, the column
Framework.
vertebral, the
Mm.
framework, the logic of that textbook. So, in the case of the Algerian textbooks, at least the ones I analyzed, they are organized according to grammar rules,
Mm.
and then the themes come to um, habiller, to
Mm.
dress up the everything turns around the grammar rules.
Mm.
There's this book I would like to show you. It's by Zoe Smith, and it's self-published. It's available on Amazon. It's called English Grammar by the Common European Levels for English Learners, Teachers, and Materials Developers. We were talking about how certain textbooks are developed around grammar rules. And we also talked about, you mentioned some books developed thematically, so each unit
Yes,
would
yes,
discuss a theme. So there are some course books, I think a lot of them follow the Common European Framework of
yeah,
Reference.
yeah.
And there are certain vocabularies that are considered basic level, certain terms that are considered more advanced, and they are considered advanced or basic based on the Common European Framework of Reference, basically. So that's the book. I don't know if you can see it properly. I can,
It's a bit blurred.
it is
So, yeah,
blurred.
English grammar, English grammar.
English Grammar by the Common European Framework Reference Level
Okay.
for English learners, teachers, and materials developers. Um, Let me show you. If I keep my face in the
Yeah,
frame, you
that's
can see it.
it. Yeah, tricky. That's it. Now we can see it. Good.
Yes.
So,
So
what about this book? Yeah.
okay. So if you look at the Fahras at the contents page, you will see that there are some. They are organized. Let me keep my face in the frame.
Mm-hmm.
They are organized according to A1 level, and then it moves to B1 level, and then it gives you a list of, for example, adjectives that are taught at the A1 level, and then adjectives that are or modals or past perfect phrases, phrasal verbs that are taught at B1 level. And then it goes up. For example, the past perfect continuous is something that you learn at B2 level. Mixed conditionals in past, present, and future, it's something that you learn at C1 level,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. So um, it's focused on grammar according to the Common European Framework of Reference. So such reference book is the kind of resource that you need to design basically a crescendo type of course book, a scaffolded kind of course book.
Mm-hmm.
So materials that are adapted to the language proficiency of your students.
Mm-hmm.
There are other criteria that and technicalities that you need to take into consideration when designing materials. And books like these, they are called the How to Write by publishers named ELT Teacher to Writer, and these are series of books that are very, very beneficial for anyone interested in materials development and materials writing. Sorry. So, for example, these ones. So this one
How
is
to
called
write excellent ELT
ELT
materials.
Materials,
All right.
and it has a series. So it's thick because it is a collection of booklets, a
Mm-hmm.
series of booklets. So it includes how to write reading and listening activities, how to write speaking activities, how to write writing activities, vocabulary presentation and practice, critical thinking activities, audio and video scripts
Mm-hmm.
for teaching. Basically, if you create a video and then a set of questions that follow that video, so how can you make sure that they are so that the video, for example, is at level. When we say at level, it means according to the Common European Framework of
Yeah,
Reference.
yeah, sure.
And then how can you make sure that the questions actually ask questions about the video, um, and
And
so on and so forth.
and concerning that, well, for our listeners, me and Amina, we have met at a conference about artificial intelligence. So you've given a talk about that, and I've given also talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and how it has how it can be used by teachers and the ELT community, of course, and even by the language learners as well. So, concerning um, the materials, ELT materials and textbooks, is there now a development or a talk about artificial intelligence?
Materials writers who are in my network are having conversations about how does AI impact their work. Do we
Yes.
still
So,
need
what is trending in your community of practice?
There are a lot of publishers that use AI to develop materials already and have been for many years. Some of them rely on AI to assess the students' input. So they use algorithms and systems to assess the students' input and the students' answers. So, for example, a platform like Duolingo,
Mm,
they use internally. They use artificial intelligence, but they also use a lot of programming for assessing
yeah.
the process and the progress of the students. So, but then as materials writers, I think materials writers are still needed because there is a unless you teach the technicalities of it. So you need to teach AI how to write corporate training materials. So that's
Yes.
very specific way of writing, how to write EAP materials, English for academic purposes materials, critical thinking activities. And these are really nice books as well. How to write teachers' books as well.
Mm,
So, unless you want to spend hours and hours teaching AI to do that, then we will be irrelevant as a profession. However, I think we are still needed.
yeah. Um, Now, I want to pass to the question of, I want to come back to curriculum and ELT materials in Europe.
Yes.
And I think that part of your research and your interest is in questions of racism and coloniality. To what extent do you think that ELT materials have been decolonized or have been colonized still? So,
Or are still colonizing.
yes, or are still colonizing. Yes. So
Mm.
this is what I meant to what extent they have been decolonized. Are they still colonizing? And is there still a problem of cultural hegemony there? Is there racism in the ELT community still? So, what do you think about these different issues that I'm sure you are really interested in?
The simple answer is the simple. I just said it in French. La réponse est simple. The simple answer to that is yes.
Mm,
At least my personal evaluation is yes. That's why I still have a job
mm,
because there is still racial bias to deconstruct. There is still colonial ideology to deconstruct. But my work is superficial. I go into the textbook, I fix that textbook, or suggest, at least recommend to fix that textbook. But the issue of racism and coloniality is an institutional one.
mm,
It's bigger than a picture of a cleaner who happens to be a person of color rather than being um, a, a white person. So if you find service jobs, for example, course books, you have a tendency that publishers rely on a big body of pictures. So if you search for cleaner or housekeeping in a hotel, then the AI or the body of the database would give you a person of color acting
mm,
as a cleaner or as a housekeeper. So that's basically shows bias. There is the stereotype of the hegemony that you are talking about, the hierarchy in society that you're talking about, and these little examples can be the tip of the iceberg. They just show you that there is an issue, but the issue is bigger than what is in a page.
That
It's the
is, we are in
institution.
that is, we are in the case of systematic racism, or and in that case, how do communities that belong to minorities, Muslim, Arab, in your experience as an Algerian and a Muslim living in the UK, how do they exist in that space where there is systematic racism still present in not only the schools, but as you are saying, in the textbook, that is in the content of what they are learning, what they are supposed to take back home as well, because this is education. So how do members of the different minorities in the UK and in Europe, in your experience, live with this reality?
They advocate when they can. They are supportive to each other. So, for example, if I see that there is a black person who is respected, valued in a space, in a professional space, I know for sure that as an Arab woman who is light skinned but also identifies as a person of color in Europe, will be respected and valued. So a privilege doesn't so privilege, when it is held by white middle class people, it doesn't cripple down to us. However, if there is one of us who is having access to a privileged position, we end up supporting each other and bringing more of us into that space.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there is also a lot of allies who are doing the work, the uncomfortable work of deconstructing the systemic racism that they grew up in observing, maybe participating in, and now they are doing the work to deconstruct it, and they bring us into the spaces of opportunities, for example. So concretely, what that means for parents is that there are some teachers who are inclusive and who are conscious of the different power dynamics, and they make so the teachers make the parents part of the solution, and they try to find solution for their children to be respected in the school space. And professionally speaking, I have a lot of white colleagues who still email me and say, "There's this opportunity. Would you like to take part of it?" And they praise my work in when I'm not present, and that's kind of how we survive in that space, and we kind of try find a way to make a difference.
And I think that as in any other place, education is a big ship, and like any big ship, steering it takes time and effort. And so change in education is only incremental first and over a long period of time. And I think that the UK itself has provided, despite the different disparities that there are between different groups and the problems of inequality, the UK has provided, I think, a good example of how education has evolved over the centuries. And so my last question to you, Amina, is tell us about your upcoming projects or initiatives that you are excited about in the field of ELT and DEI.
Mm, very tricky question. I don't know how much I can reveal, but
Not anything exclusive, no.
okay, I'm not gonna do that then. So I'm collaborating with a lot of beautiful people in the field of diversity, equity, inclusion. One of them is Tyson Seaburn, and that's his book. I'm doing
Mm.
some shameless
How to
promotion.
write inclusive materials. Mm.
Yes, so we're collaborating on a project together. I'm running webinars with publishers. My upcoming webinar will be on the 29th of September, and it will be about how can we make back to school a positive experience to a lot of students, and how can we make sure that teachers include their students, whether neurodiverse students or historically marginalized communities within the space of education. And then after that, I would have another webinar in October with another client of mine. Sorry.
Mhm.
So besides webinars, I work with publishers, but I think the webinars is the space where I get to exchange with teachers, and I get to see their frustration about how to deal with diverse group of students. The other thing I'm doing is working with Algerian university lecturers.
Mhm.
I run a course on EMI, English as a Medium of Instruction, with a company called Limitless Learning. They are Algerian e-learning platform based in the US, but then they cater high quality education programs. I'm saying high quality included in my course. Then again, that's some shameless self promotion.
No,
But more,
that's an excellent plug. So,
yes. So I'm running these courses every month, and then so September is I have a group. October I won't. November I will, and so on and so forth. And they can find out about EMI and pedagogy, and how they can progressively include English into their practice as university lecturers in Algeria, and how can pedagogy help them do that.
wonderful.